Dead on Your Feet, Arthur Grant Michaels, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1993. Stan Kraychik Mystery, Book 3, narrator Eric Aust. In memory of Tajana and Andre, with gratitude and respect and love, thanks to the patience and generosity of my friends. Chapter 16, Dance, Ballerina, Dance. Have you ever been awakened with the smell of French press coffee, hot buttered crumpets, sliced fresh fruit, and soft breakfast cheese, all while flying at 41,000 feet? And with impeccable service, no less. If a first-class flight to Europe was any indication of life on that side of the ocean, I was ready to consider a big move. However, shortly after touchdown, 8 a.m. local time, I faced coach class royalty once again. Though I'd flown like royalty, I quickly discovered that a hired car from Heathrow Airport into London could cost the equivalent of half a week's tips. A good week, which was extravagant even for me, and since I was no longer on Marshall Sanders' dime, down I went into London's legendary Tube. But riding the underground into town was both enjoyable and instructive, like a free tour of the city's outskirts. For much of the ride, the train remained on the surface and trundled past backyards and alleys and all the signs of real people's lives. Pale, plump women grabbing over fences, their clotheslines hung with laundry swaying in breezy counterpoint to their morning magpie gossip. Mechanics in overalls, their twisted bodies half consumed by the open bonnets of the ailing trucks or cars, and youngsters racing each other on bicycles or else scuffling hand to hand. It was almost like passing through the back lot of a movie set. I got off the train at South Kingston and walked the short distance to my hotel. This neighborhood was different from what I'd seen on the train ride into town. Here were rows of Edwardian townhouses, all uniform and tidy and white, bounded by gleaming black wrought iron railings and distinguished only by their front door treatments and the occasional bed of chaste paper whites or showy azaleas. It was the kind of stuff you see a lot on Sunday night public television. I found my hotel complete with its French name, though all traces of old England had been removed by the Greek owners. One thing they hadn't been able to renovate was the view. My room faced the Victoria and Albert Museum directly across the street. Couldn't get much more Brit than that. It was 10 o'clock, not too soon to set about my mission to find Marielle Rabinskaya, and I figured the most direct way to find a prima ballerina was to call the ballet companies. As far as I knew, London had only one major classical company, the Royal Ballet. However, it took far more than one telephone call to locate my query, for whoever answered would cheerfully give me an alternative number to try. This went on until 5 attempts later, a woman finally said that yes, she could take a message for Miss Rabinskaya, and no, she could not release her address or telephone number to me. I told her it was urgent that I speak with Marielle and that I was in London as Max Harkey's representative. "I shall give her your message," said the woman, "and I shall ring you back with her reply." Along with my telephone number, she asked the name of the hotel, which I told her. "Don't forget to mention Max Harkey," I said. "I have made a note of that, Mr. Kraychik. Goodbye." I waited impatiently for her call, which came a half hour later. She told me that Marielle Rabinskaya would meet me at 3 o'clock sharp at the Connaught Hotel. A rendezvous there implied that the young ballerina was already on Assoluta. I took a long, hot shower and put on fresh clothes and set out for my meeting with Marielle. It was early yet, but I decided to walk part way and make a brief shopping tour of London. I bought a map in the hotel lobby, then walked a few blocks along Brompton Road to a cafe, another place with a French name. I ordered a café pressé and a fruit and cream pastry, then planned my route to the Connaught Hotel. The first stop was Harrods, where I toured the legendary food halls. The main room was a vast tiled chamber which, like an enormous Roman bath, its glazed walls glistened like white ice with vivid hand-painted borders. Food items, exotic and pedestrian, were displayed below in sparkling glass cases, lavishly arranged like goods at Cartier. The produce section purveyed fruits from around the world, all clearly labeled by name and country of origin, including Macintosh apples from Maine, USA, proof that we were still a recognized colony. From Harrods, I took the tube to Piccadilly Circus to get to the train. I had to go down, down, down numerous escalators a mile below the Earth's crust, or so it felt. I waited for the train, which arrived in minutes, an unlikely event in New World Boston. Once the doors slid shut, the train accelerated to a raucous velocity that verged on self-destruction, yet the sturdy coaches tolerated the abuse very well, had obviously done so for many years and probably would continue for many more. Much like myself, I thought. The chaos and excitement of Piccadilly Circus, which is actually a gigantic traffic rotary and not a performance arena per se, caused me to exclaim aloud, "I'm in London!" On my walk up Piccadilly toward the Connaught Hotel, I stopped at Fortnum and Mason. If Harrods was luxurious, Fortnum and Mason was regal. I half expected the security guard to ask for my pedigree documents, but the place was well attended by people from other countries, and not everyone looked like royal blood. I decided to buy some violet and rose-flavored chocolate creams for Rafik, something to renew the romance of our love, at least for myself. The clerk rang up the sale, a huge sum, until I realized that it was in mere pounds sterling, and that my cost in dollars would be even more. Ah, what price romance! Just then, an East Indian princess wafted by in a billowing silk scarf, oblivious to the luxury around her. When I saw her eyes, I was stunned, for they were too familiar. They were the eyes of Charlene McChannel. How was it possible, I wondered? How could she be here in London as well? Had she been on the same flight, and why was she no longer posing as La Duchessa? I was about to approach her, but she had vanished. Perhaps it had been a jet-lag hallucination. At the Burlington Arcade, I bought Nicole a cigarette holder. If she was trying to smoke less, she might as well play the grande dame. While she did, and finally at Maitland's chemist, I found a small green bottle of balsam cologne that rekindled a distant memory of my first meeting with Lieutenant Branco. I bought it, not certain whether I would keep it for myself or present it to him, since he was almost part of the family now. It was exactly 3 o'clock when I walked through the flower-bordered entrance to the Connaught Hotel, a red brick building on Carlos Place, just off Grosvenor Square. Though warm and inviting, the hotel also had the sacrosanct air of a museum, a living testament to the zenith of late 19th century refinement. The wood-paneled lobby resembled a gentleman's private study more than a common egress for the guests, and if I was thinking in words like that, the Victorian energy was clearly still present and affecting. I paused to admire an arrangement of tiny white lilies and fresh-cut fuchsia when a slender young man in dark vest and striped pants approached me. "May I be of assistance?" he said, which I interpreted as, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" I told him my name, and he said, "Ah, yes, Mr. Kraychik," with perfect Czech vowels and consonants. "Mademoiselle Rabinskaya apologizes. She will be detained and suggests you should await her in the lounge." He directed me there. In the lounge, the bar waiter escorted me to a reserved table set within a bay window that faced the bar on the opposite side of the room. I settled myself into a heavy tub-back armchair upholstered in dark leather and ordered a martini. The lounge reflected the same past glory as the hotel lobby. Walls paneled in chocolate brown oak, a brass chandelier with faceted glass shades, a pair of mounted deer heads, numerous paintings of hunting dogs, a huge portrait of Charles II, and another of an anonymous lady whose billowing salmon pink skirt matched exactly the color on some of the pillows on the scallop-backed sofa directly below it. The carpet throughout had a muted red lozenge pattern and was reassuringly worn. The bar itself had no rail for standing, so it was an open stage for the bartender. In British, the barman, to ply his art, against the backdrop of a wall-sized mirror and shelves full of Victorian glass, decanters and vases, the barman, dressed in his white tunic coat, gathered the makings for my cocktail. He conferred on the bar tools and the liqueurs, the same reverence a Shakespeare actor allows to spoken syllables. He prepared the drink on a small raised section of the center of the bar. All was accomplished quietly within the shadows of sound. Even the trickle of ice swirling around the long glass stirring rod was muted. Meanwhile, the bar waiter re-entered the lounge from a swinging door off to one side, carrying on his tray a porcelain bowl filled with, good Lord, potato chips. Then in one long, continuous, graceful phrase worthy of a danseur noble, he swept my cocktail from the bar, placed it upon his tray, glided it to my table, and delivered both drink and comestible to me, all with the most liquid movement and the barest hush of sound. I restrained myself from applauding him. He said, "Some fresh crisps for you," and I couldn't help remarking, "You move beautifully." He replied with a modest nod, "Kind of you, sir." And I'd guessed right about the snack. It was potato chips, or more correctly, crisps. But I'd not expect them to be made especially for me, and my cocktail at that moment. The only problem facing me was in the serenity of the Connaught Hotel lounge. How was I supposed to enjoy those warm, crunchy wafers of flash-fried potato? Was it some kind of test? Was this what finally separated the aristocracy from the commoners? The mastery of silent mastication? I chose a small crisp from the top of the mound, one that might fit completely into my big mouth and be suitably muffled. Yet in that microsecond of temporomandibular activity, when the bespoke potato crisp was about to be shattered between my Slavic chops, that was precisely when all the whisperings of conversation throughout the lounge arrived simultaneously at a hiatus, just in time for the big crunch. A confounded silence followed, but within those dazed moments, as after any epiphany, when the other guests began to comprehend what had transpired, what they had witnessed firsthand in the sanctum sanctorum of the Connaught lounge, that someone had actually eaten a crisp. Then one by one, at various tables, people began to try the forbidden wafers themselves, until finally the lounge itself, that bastion of late Victorian high manners, resounded with a well-tempered fugue of crunching and noshing. The barman caught my eye and gave a quick wink. Then entered Marielle Rabinskaya, limping on crutches, and looking like a wounded swan, ethereal and pale. She was extremely small and fragile, but had enormous sad eyes, dark, convincing eyes suitable for the great tragic roles, just like her great aunt back in Boston, the venerable Madame Rabinskaya herself. Despite the crutches, Marielle moved like a graceful apparition, a lost being from the spirit world of romantic ballet, who had taken on a mortal form for those few hours. Her long black hair only enhanced her pallor. She embodied the old world artiste, too sensitive and too vulnerable to hardship, not like her counterparts in Boston, who were of the earth evolved, improved, and tough. I stood up to greet her. She balanced herself on one crutch and preferred a lovely pale hand. "You brought news of Max, then?" she said eagerly, dispensing with formalities. "News?" I replied. "Don't you know?" "That he's dead, of course." She pulled her hand away abruptly, then lowered herself into her chair and laid the crutches next to her. "I apologize for the inconvenience," I said, eyeing the crutches. I had completely forgotten about her injury, which Max Harkey had described to us the night of his dinner. "We could have met upstairs in your room." She smiled politely. "One does not live at the Connaught," she said, correcting my gaffe with the grace of a sledgehammer. How was I supposed to know that one did and did not do at the Connaught? "But I couldn't very well see you in my flat," she continued, "since I have no idea who you are, except that you claim to be Max's representative here from the States." That's true to a degree. And what exactly is that degree? She said with chilly reserve. I'm not officially connected to Max, I said, but I had to convince you to see me. Oh, bravo, then, Mr. Kraychik. Your ruse worked. But what is so urgent that you must lie in order to see me? I'm trying to find Max's killer. Mariel's strong, dramatic features seemed to dissolve as her jaw fell open. Are you saying he was murdered, then? Yes, I replied. At that moment, the bar waiter appeared with a tray bearing a complete tea service that included exquisite porcelain pieces containing the tea, milk, and sugar, along with a tiered plate of sterling silver, aried with puff pastry, savories, finger sandwiches, miniature scones, petite fours, and fresh berries. On the bottom tier was numerous small bowls of assorted marmalades and two larger ones, mounded with Devon cream that looked deliciously firm and spreadable, but the kaleidoscope of treats now before us did nothing to ease Marielle's shock at hearing the fact that Max Harkey had not died naturally, but had been killed. I am certain that you are lying to me. I don't know what you want, Mr. Kraychik, but your cruelty is saying that, Max. I'm sorry. You learned it this way, I said. Why didn't my aunt tell me about it then? Marielle had raised her voice. I remained quiet. She continued rather loudly. Aunt Ruby told me that Max had suffered a heart attack and had died instantly. But now, here you are with an absurd story about a murder. I'm really sorry. I thought you knew. Surely the newspapers. No, Mr. Kraychik, I did not know. I haven't been well, and I haven't been reading newspapers either. Boorishly self-conscious, I took a slug of my martini. Then, as if to nullify our bad start, Marielle exercised consummate British decorum and proceeded with her tea. They are so kind to remember the extra cream for me, she said vapidly. I am supposed to be gaining weight. She pressed a chunk of heavy Devon cream and a spoonful of rose-petal marmalade onto a tiny scone and placed it in her mouth. Then she closed her eyes and let the morsel soften and crumble within. A glow rose in her pale cheeks. She dispatched her heavenly tidbit with a delicate swallow, then opened her eyes. Better, I asked. Yes, thank you, she replied. Can you tell me about your relationship to Max Harkey? There isn't much to tell, she said in a vain attempt to shrug off my question. But her large eyes failed her. She avoided my gaze and looked toward her teacup as she poured. She seemed to address the teacup instead of me. I suspected that something horrible had happened. My dear aunt seemed to be protecting me again. I just never thought. Marielle then put her hand to her throat and gasped softly. Once again, her complexion became ashen, and she slumped back into her chair. Are you all right? I asked. She held up her other hand as if to ward me off, then closed her eyes and became extremely quiet, almost not breathing. I caught the eyes of the bar waiter, who was already heading toward her table. May I assist you? He said to her. She opened her eyes to him and said, I'm fine, thank you. It always happens after the first bit of food, but it passes quickly. Thus dismissed, the bar waiter left us alone. Marielle looked at me with her big sad eyes. You see, she said in a whisper, I'm pregnant. Ah, was all I could manage, while my mind raced to the most obvious conclusion. I reached quickly for my cocktail, but the glass arrived at my lips empty. It's made me quite sick, she said. Between that and my injury, I couldn't possibly travel. Otherwise, I would have come to Boston immediately after Max's death. You look so thin to be pregnant, I said stupidly. I know. I was concerned about that too, but the doctors tell me that everything is fine now. I should start gaining weight soon. I may even have breasts. Her directness unnerved me a bit. Then her eyes met, and my instinct told me that my first guess had been right. But still, I had to say it to confirm it with her. My whisper seemed loud enough for the entire lounge to hear. Is it Max's child? Marielle nodded vigorously, and for a moment her tired eyes glistened with pure joy. We had a common bond with her love for Max Harkey and my pursuit of his killer. I said, Did you know Max kept a diary? Of course, she answered, proving the existence of the mysterious missing diary. Had you ever read it? I'm sure it was private, she said quickly. I pressed her. But had you read it? To my mind, Marielle Ravenskaya had already played her trump card by telling me that she was carrying Max Harkey's child, so why was she pretending to be so moral about reading his personal diary? I said, it may hold the answer to Max's murder. How? He may have written about his relationship with other people? I'm certain that he did, she said, and with brutal candor, I added. Mariel hesitated. It's never easy to confess that you casually rummaged through someone else's more private affairs, even your lover's. I said, do you want his killer to go free? Of course not, she said quickly. Just then the bar waiter appeared with a fresh cocktail for me. He quickly surveyed the table and then, psychic to the core, asked nothing before vanishing again. Mariel sighed. I've told no one, she said, but yes, I did read his diary. I think he wanted me to, since he always left it where I was sure to find it. I read it every day until he returned to Boston. I told myself it was the only way to be sure of his love for me. Had he proposed to you then? Yes, she said, but he never knew about the child. I suffered vertigo and fell during rehearsal. The ballet company was concerned only about my knee and saw the accident as a tragedy, but to me, it was a small prize for carrying Max's child. So you loved him? All my life. But it had been so complicated. He was always like a part of the family, yet I had always loved him more than I should have. All my youth I dreamed of our love, but never believed it could happen. Why not? Isn't it obvious? I'm so much younger. Sometimes that doesn't matter, I said. Marielle Ravenskaya looked at me as though I was the stupidest boy on a grade school field trip. Don't you see, she said, my great aunt loved him too. Oh dear, I thought, Marielle went on. Aunt Ruby raised me after I'd lost my parents. I was only 12, but I was already dancing seriously, preparing for a career. The timing couldn't have been more propitious for a young girl to face the first great love in her life. Living with my aunt, I saw Max Harkey often, perhaps too often, and as much as I tried to avoid Max, I felt destined to fall in love with him, and I could never tell my aunt about it for fear of her wrath. I may have been young, but I sensed her feelings for Max, and they were exactly like mine. Did he know how you felt back then? I was precocious enough to know not to tell him, but I'm sure my eyes and my body gave me away. Whenever he came to visit, I had to make excuses to run away. I'm sure Aunt Ruby knew as well. There were awful scenes between us, though nothing explicit was ever said. It was obvious to me that we both wanted the same man, and one of us was too old and the other too young. So I sacrificed myself to ballet. The pursuit of art became my whole life. It was the easiest solution. Whew, I thought. Marielle continued, and the last time Max was in London, all those years of denial between us finally culminated in a single night. What had preceded that moment no longer had any meaning for me. We knew that we would spend the rest of our lives together, or else die. Strong stuff, I thought, thankful for my martini. Marielle said, it sounds melodramatic, but there wasn't a moment's doubt for either of us, except that you had to read Max Harkey's diary to be sure. Marielle's face colored slightly. I said, how much of this does your great aunt know? Max promised to tell her everything when he returned to Boston, but I don't know if he got the chance. When Aunt Ruby called me after Max's death, we spoke only about him and about my injury, nothing else. So as far as you know, I said. Marielle completed my sentence. My dear Aunt Ruby knows nothing about the baby. Unless she's got that diary, I said. What do you mean? Said Marielle with alarm. It's disappeared. The police never found it among Max's possessions. Then how did you know about it? Max's houseboy mentioned it to me. Then got killed shortly after. No, she said. Yes, I said sadly. Now, can you tell me what was in it? Marielle still resisted. I promised her I'd keep whatever she told me confidential unless it would guarantee finding Max's killer. That seemed to unlock her rigid secrecy. She began. Max was a marvelous journalist. He wrote about everything. I only want to hear about the people in his life. Did he say anything about Elisa Cortland? My other rival? Replied Marielle with a small laugh. Yes, Max had relations with her, but you see, they had no past together, not the way Max and I did. Max didn't love her, he barely knew her. His life could go on easily without her, despite any momentary passion they shared. Is that what he said? I asked. I'm paraphrasing it, of course. The details were much more lurid. Apparently she is a nymphomaniac and quite good at it. Did that disturb you? Why should it? My connection with Max, you don't quite understand how a woman can feel, do you? Sometimes, I said ruefully. Mariel explained it simply. Elisa was like a decoration for Max, a toy. And you? I asked. I was Max's future, she said confidently. Heady stuff, but I wanted to know what else was in that diary. Then it occurred to me to ask her directly. Do you have the diary now? She stared at me with her big, sad brown eyes. Why did those eyes seem that she wasn't telling me? And she said, Max took it back to Boston with him. You're certain? She spoke somewhat sharply. If I had the diary and I thought it would help you, I would show it to you. As it is, you probably know more about me now than anyone else, other than Max, perhaps, because you're a real stranger, yet seem compassionate. Which one of us was acting out a role now? Was I an objective bystander, honestly relating to this beautiful, if wounded young creature, or was she an elusive sprite, telling fabulous lies to please me? Did Max write anything about Tony Di Natale? I asked. The conductor? I nodded. Mariel said Max knew that she desired him, but he never encouraged her. Apparently, she is a real talent, and Max didn't want to risk her musical assistance for the sake of a quick toss. He respected her work. How noble, I said. It's true. Then what about his feelings for your aunt? Did he write about Madame Rabenskaya? Mariel said. More than anyone else, including you. I sensed her pulling back. I'd rather not discuss that part of it. But just minutes ago, you offered to show me the diary if you had it. But I don't have it, she said, and if I did, perhaps I'd change my mind now. Does it incriminate your great aunt? Haven't you asked enough questions, she said. Then she closed her eyes and complained. I'm feeling tired. The talent for quick change emotion seemed to run in the family. Mariel signaled for the bar waiter and asked him to call a cab for her. While she waited, I asked if there was anything in Max Harkey's diary about Scott Malloy. She reluctantly told me that Max had felt protective toward Scott. No sex then, I asked bluntly. Max had stopped all that back in his early teens. I suppose that made him a rare model of psychosexual health, except perhaps for impregnating his mentor's grandniece, a woman young enough to be his daughter. I bade one more question of Mariel. I must go, she protested. Think of Max's killer, I said. She replied, You're making me wish I'd never admitted looking at that diary. It is personal, you know. Please, I begged. You're the only one who can tell me now that the diary has vanished. Finally, she acquiesced, and I asked about Marshall Zander. As far as I know, she said, Max and he were once best friends. Apparently back when Marshall had hoped that Max would be more than that to him. That's probably why he gave all that money to Max's ballet company. That's all, Mariel added almost regretfully. It wasn't in the diary, but I know that Max was plagued by it, by the idea that Marshall's hope of love never died. Her cab arrived. She pulled herself up onto her crutches. I'm sorry. I can't offer you a lift, she said courteously, yet unable to contain her eagerness to escape. One emotion had been honest, at least. I don't know how to thank you, I said. She smiled wanly. Find Max's killer. That's enough. The doorman escorted her out to her cab, and she was gone. Too late, I realized that I'd forgotten to ask her if Max had ever mentioned Rafik. It would have been a choice tidbit to offer him on my return, the secret truths from Max Harkey's diary. I asked the bar waiter for our bill. With a beneficent smile, he said, I've taken care of it. Really? That's extremely kind of you. The Connaught is proud of its service. I offered him a generous tip, but he politely refused it, claiming the gratuities weren't customary there. I thanked him again and headed back to my hotel, quite pleased to have received such hospitality. Back at my hotel, I confirmed my return flight for the next morning, then called Rafik to tell him what time I'd be arriving in Boston. He wasn't home, so I left a forlorn message on his answering machine. Then I called Nicole at the shop to give her the same message, but Ramon told me that she had left early that day. Thus defeated and alone, feeling abandoned by my nearest and dearest, I took myself to supper and then to the theater. I chose a popular and long-running comedy, a murder mystery highly recommended by the hotel staff. Trouble was, it had been on the board so long that the actors and actresses were robots. Nothing at all like the evasive and ephemeral characters in the drama of my private life. When I checked out of my hotel the next morning, I faced an astronomical bill. Even though Hene, my travel agent, had prepaid the room, a huge charge had been added by the Connaught Hotel. The bar tab for the afternoon I'd spent with Marielle Rabinskaya. When I asked the clerk how that charge had got on my bill, he explained that the secretary from the Royal Ballet had given the Connaught my name and my hotel, and that as a trade courtesy, a few of the most reputable hotels throughout London still accept the charges incurred by their guests at other fine places like the Connaught, adding their own service charges, of course. I guessed I was supposed to be grateful for the favor, but after the previous day's carefree shopping spree for my friends in Boston, I prayed that my plastic would handle the unexpected hotel bill. Fortunately, the gods of credit were watching over me, for my charge limit had been miraculously increased overnight. Apparently, the purchases I'd made in the various London shops had tripped a computer flag on my account and marked me as an international big-time spender. Accordingly, up went the limit. Later at the airport, I got through immigration without a hitch. The flight departed on time, and 6 first-class hours later, I was safely taxiing on Boston tarmac. No one met me at the airport, and after the cab ride home, no cat greeted me at the door. 2 telephone calls, one to Rafik and one to Nicole, yielded nothing, and no messages had been left on my machine. Taped to the refrigerator door, a guarantee that I would see it, was a hastily written note from Rafik explaining that he had taken Sugar Baby to his apartment. Abduct me, abduct my cat. I poured myself a shot of bourbon and toasted my own homecoming. Welcome home, I said to the empty rooms. We all missed you terribly. Among the mail was an envelope addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it and a key fell out. The note inside read, "They wouldn't make a copy, so this is the original one. Give it back before Mr. Xander finds out. I took it to Bejos, Rico." Getting the key for me had been Rico's last gesture of goodwill, and I couldn't even thank him for it. I put the key in my pants pocket and lay down on the sofa to plan my next move. If nothing else, that afternoon I would ransom my cat from my lover, but instead I found myself weeping for my trousseau, now dead and gone. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.